This presentation, Growth Equals Progress, was prepared for TitleCon 2020. I am Darlene Hardesty, the principal at Burkhart Elementary School in Perry Township, and this was prepared in collaboration with Tony DeSano, our master teacher. How do we track growth? The first thing you have to know is, what is your school goal overall? What percentage of students need to reach proficiency in each grade level in order to help you meet that goal? And how will you track progress towards meeting those goals? So Burkhart School uses a program called Evaluate to monitor student progress towards mastery of the standards. Every 2 months, students are assessed over the entire set of standards in English language arts and math. The first month, part of the standards are assessed, and the second month in that 2-month period, the rest of the standards are assessed. So in totality, over that 2-month period, all standards will have been assessed. What we do is we take an average of the score in each content area to determine first a baseline for our growth chart. So that's what you can see right here. We have 2 examples, one for 3rd grade, and you can see that their baseline measurement for the first 2 months that we test, which for us would be August and September. For that period, our 3rd graders were showing that just over 4% of the children were showing proficiency in meeting the grade level standards. That's not surprising to us to have a low number to start the school year because we really haven't had a chance to teach them all of those things just yet. Similarly, for 4th grade, you can see just over 3.5% of the students are showing proficiency during our baseline measure. On our graph, you'll see this blue line, and this is what we call the suggested progression, or basically a target for us to be sure that our students are going to be able to reach our end of the year goals. Each blue dot represents the growth target for another progression, which is 2 more months of progress monitoring using our Evaluate system. The orange line is what shows us how our students are actually performing, whether or not they are meeting their targets, and whether or not we're tracking towards success. So if we take a look, remember our baseline was just over 4% for our 3rd graders to start the year. They took another set of tests in October and in November, and we averaged that to find out what percentage of our students are showing proficiency to meet our end of the year goals and to show mastery of our standards in that grade level. You can see that our target is just over 20% of our students at this point would be showing that proficiency. But you can tell we are well below that based on this data, with not quite even 8% of the students reaching that goal just yet. As we move into the next progression, which for us would have been a set of tests taken in December and January, the average of that is much closer, much closer to the suggested or target line for us. And so it's important to consider, what are the differences? Why might that have happened for our students? What work did we do in between to help our students get there? And we're going to dive into that here in just a little bit. If you look at our 4th grade example, you can tell that the orange line again is their actual performance, and they've been tracking very close to where we would expect them to track throughout those months. During this next progression, you can see that the 4th grade students jumped above the target line, showing us that they are on track not only to meet the goal for the school year, but also to exceed that, which is really exciting for us when you think about student data. We're going to pause now, and I'm going to ask you to pause your computer and have you reflect and do a little bit of work here on your own for a few minutes. Once you've had a chance to do this, go ahead and start back up and we'll go on to the next part. Here's what I want you to think about and try. What data source do you use? Is it something like we have, like Evaluate? Do you use a benchmark system? What is it that your school uses to monitor student progress? If you take time to chart it as we have on this sheet, are you on track to meet your desired goals for your school? Are your students tracking above or below that? Because that's important for us as we consider the next part of our presentation. We've already looked at one way to monitor student progress and track growth. That data was at the grade and school level. Now we are going to dive a little bit deeper into that to see classroom or group data at the student level. As before, we are still looking at our Evaluate data, remembering that every month our students take an assessment to see their progress towards mastery of grade level standards. Each line represents a student in the class or group, and names, of course, have been removed for privacy reasons. So if we were going to look at how a student performed, we might look at this student. Remember that to develop a baseline, we take an average of the August and September scores, because that is over the 2-month period in which all standards would have been assessed. So you can see that this student scored an average of 38% mastery, and you can see it's been color-coded red. We use a color coding system, red showing well below benchmark, yellow shows approaching proficiency, green shows us that the student has reached proficiency, and any blue shows that they're well above the proficiency line. At the beginning of the year, we're not surprised to see so many students in red. As before on our chart, you notice that many students were not showing mastery. That's because we're testing end-of-the-year standards. We haven't taught them all yet, and so it's not a surprise to us. As the year progresses, we want to see fewer and fewer students in the red, and then fewer in yellow, and more in green, or more in blue. And so you can see that's what's happening over time with our data in this sheet. The way that the color codings are set up are to align with proficiency standards related to our state testing, first I-STEP and now I-LEARN, to ensure that the predictability is in alignment with that assessment. One of the things that we look for is whether or not a student is showing growth and by how much. And that is why we have these progressions, because we know for our students that growth shows that they're making progress, and we know progress will eventually get us to success. And that's what's most important for us, is that all of our students have the chance to grow and succeed. So that's what these purple and lighter shades are. It's going to show you who's growing and by how much. The darker the purple color is either going to show a negative or a smaller amount of growth, and the lighter shade of purple shows the greatest amount of growth. And you can see as you look across, if we look at our first student, their average was 17 and then 30. So that student grew in the first progression by 13 percentage points. Now they're making progress and they grew quite a bit, but they're still performing below grade level. In contrast, you might have a student who's performing well, but maybe they're not showing as much growth as someone else. So we might look down here. This student started at a proficiency rate of 60%, and they grew 5%, which is noted here, but not necessarily as much as someone who grew the 13 points. When we use this, we're using Excel and or Google Sheets to help us to monitor and track our data. Each teacher has responsibility for their group of students and in determining next steps. Before we get into that, I'd like you to pause the video and take a moment to reflect on your own practices. How do you monitor student progress? How do you monitor student growth? And how might a tracking system such as this impact your overall achievement? Now that we've classified our data, it's time to identify our target students. These students are those that will need specific, targeted support to help them continue growing. The first thing we ask our teachers to do is to predict who from their student group may not be growing as much as the others. So, for example, this teacher said that Laura might not be growing because she started the year doing very well. She may not have shown as much growth because her score was so high to begin with. Kieran, the teacher, was concerned that while he can recall key details, he's not able to identify the main idea or theme. And so that was where that justification comes from. The reason we have our teachers predict who in their student group is not showing as much growth and to think through the why behind that is to help them realize what their perceptions and biases may be regarding their student group. It's often easy to get caught in the mindset of, oh, well, this student is gifted and talented, or this student receives special education services. When we look at growth, we can take away all of the labels, and we're really just focusing on progress itself. And that's really critical to helping all students be able to grow. Once our teachers have had a chance to do the prediction and justification of that, we go back and we look at that actual data, and we're going to take a look, as we did on the previous screen, of which students really are showing the lowest amount of growth. Sometimes you're going to see a regression, such in this case, Jasmine, instead of moving forward in that period of time, she's actually showing that she's not doing as well as she was at one point. That can be attributed to guessing. It can be attributed to increased complexity of questions, sometimes the testing language, but definitely it's concerning. Other students in this group you can see have grown some, and Sadie, though she had a 10-point growth, was not a student performing at the top of the class. The next column you're looking at is whether or not they're a repeat targeted student. This for us is important to be able to track, is this student not showing adequate growth over time? And if that is the case, there may be an underlying cause that we need to examine in order to support that student. Once we have this sheet completed for our students, we start to go back to creating a plan of action. What's next for us? We've got this data, we've kind of thought through it a little bit at this point, but what are we going to do with it? First, we looked at what percentage of problems were completed correctly and divided the student work into 3 categories regarding those who scored in the high range, those who performed at a medium level, and those who performed at a low level. Once we had done that, we're going to look back to identify the specific trends that we see within that data. So looking at the student work from the high category, you can see that the work was organized, student understood what operation to use, they labeled things. In the medium category, you can see that there was something that happened wrong. Maybe it was a calculation error. And those performing at the low level really seemed to not understand what to do, and perhaps maybe had a comprehension issue with it, or they just couldn't visualize what to do. Once we've taken the time to identify the trends and our needs, we're one step closer to putting a plan into place. So now it's time to develop our plan and work with our students. For those students that are in my target list that have an identified need dealing with our story problems, I'm going to pull them together for a small group lesson. They're not the only students that I would have to include, but they are definitely students I want to be sure get some extra attention and support from me. First, we would start by reviewing the critical attributes. So the critical attributes are what we need to do in order to put our plan into place, what we'll need to do to have success. So we're going to review those first with our students. The next thing we're going to do is walk through a gradual release model. The I do is the part that the teacher would do, teaching, thinking aloud, showing through modeling. The we do is a give and take between the teacher and the students. The teacher might do part of the problem. The students might do part of the problem. They're going to share their thinking. The teacher is going to have students share with one another or share with the group as a whole. Finally, the students would have a chance to do some story problems on their own to practice the mini lesson and to see how things are going. The teacher would be able to see if that reteaching was enough or if they need to continue on in another way or with other examples or strategies. During this presentation, I referenced Evaluate and Catapult Learning. Their website is noted below, as you can see right here, if you'd like to get additional information for your own school. As you can see, the benefits are pretty incredible and have really helped us transform how we're reaching our students. Additionally, I'd like to recognize NIET, the National Institute for Excellence in Teaching. Perry Township Schools made an amazing decision to partner with NIET 9 years ago. Through this partnership, our educators continue to grow and become even better at our craft. In turn, our kids are seeing great success. #WeGrowKids.